Okay, this is the first episode in a new series called Open for Discussion. What was the first muscle car? People will give you all kinds of different answers when asked this question, but most people will say it's 1964 Pontiac GTO. But was it really the first muscle car? So in this episode, we're going to look at cars that could be considered muscle cars that never got that title, that came before the 1964 Pontiac GTO. But before we get started or get onto the cars, what is a muscle car by definition? The car has to be American in origin, intermediate sized car with a big V8 under the hood, rear wheel drive. All right, so let's get started. We're going to do the honorable mentions first before we get to the actual cars that should be considered muscle cars but wasn't because the term didn't exist yet. First up in the honorable mentions category, 1951 Hudson Hornet. It pioneered a step-down design. It featured a functional drop floor pan in the chassis with a lower center of gravity, which made the car handle better. It was powered by Hudson's 308 cubic inch displacement flathead 6, also known as H145. Power output was 145 horsepower. Twin H was offered as a dealer option in November of 1951. This car was legendary in the early 50s because it outhandled just about anything. The car actually lives on in Disney Pixar's movie Cars. Doc Hudson was the fabulous Hudson Hornet. All right, next up in the honorable mentions category, 1953 Chevy Corvette. When Chevy came out with the Corvette, it was modeled after what the Europeans were doing. Most of their cars were powered by 6 cylinders. Fastest car in the world was Jaguar XK120, which was powered by an inline 6-cylinder, made 160 brake horsepower, did 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. In the first years of the Vette, Chevy did what the Europeans were doing. Not saying that 6-cylinder doesn't have any muscle, just saying that there was more to be desired. 1957 was the first year Chevy offered a V8 in the Corvette. And my question to you is, was the Corvette ever really a muscle car? I always thought the Corvette was like a sports car. Even in the 60s where they did the whole Stingray thing, was it a muscle car then? In the comment section below, please. Last honorable mention, 1955 through 1957 Ford Thunderbird. This is the only entry that has years associated with it because after 1957, the Thunderbird grew into the Big Bird. The Ford Thunderbird was Ford's response to the Chevy Corvette. Ford also helped Corvette sales by making competition for the Corvette with the Thunderbird because there was no other competitors to the Corvette at that time. Ford didn't realize it yet, but they totally made a new market segment with the Thunderbird called the personal luxury car. It was powered by Ford's Y-Block V8. You could either get it in a 292 cubic inch displacement configuration or a 312 cubic inch displacement configuration. But if you needed more power, baby, it was available with a Paxton supercharger, making around 300-ish horsepower. Okay, on to the meat and potatoes. First up, 1949 Oldsmobile Rocket 88. In 1949, General Motors took the 303 V8 nickname, the Rocket, out of the big luxury Olds 98 and put it into the smaller and lighter 88 series, which started a war, not the muscle car war, but the cubic inch war that lasted up until the 1970s when Cadillac put a 501 cubic inch engine into their cars. The 303 cubic inch displacement V8 produced 135 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but the car was actually surprisingly light for the time period. The Oldsmobile Rocket 88 dominated the NASCAR circuits in the late 40s, early 50s until the Hudson Hornet came and put it out to pasture. Okay, next up, 1955 Chrysler 300 Letter Series. First American car since the Duesenberg to make 300 horsepower. The Chrysler 300 was built for the NASCAR circuit and won numerous races. It was powered by Chrysler's Firepower 331 cubic inch displacement Hemi V8. Side note, you could get the same V8 in the New Yorker trim, but power was capped at 255 horsepower. To get the full 300, you had to step up to the Chrysler 300. In later years, they actually made it more potent, about 355 horsepower, but they just became huge land yachts. This was the smallest Chrysler 300 I think they ever made. After this, they just get bigger and longer and heavier. Still powerful, very powerful car, very fast, powerful car. They just get huge. Okay, moving on. 1957 AMC Rambler Rebel, considered by many to be the first intermediate-sized car with high performance, powered by AMC's 327, which made its debut in 1957. Also worth mentioning, it came out a whole 5 years before Chevy produced its 327. It was produced for 1 year only, the Rebel was. First time a large engine displacement was put into an intermediate-sized car after World War II. The big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, didn't even offer an intermediate-sized car in 57. With 255 horsepower on tap, the Rebel could get from 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds, according to Motor Trend back in the day. It was said to have been the world's fastest sedan. If you wanted more power, AMC offered fuel injection, which took horsepower from 255 to 288 horsepower. It's also worth mentioning that this is the only color scheme that was available for the Rebel. So if you're looking for a Rebel, if it's not in this color scheme, they either A, painted it, or B, it's not a Rebel. Okay, up next, 1957 Studebaker Golden Hawk. This one is a little bit of a stretch, but it was powered by a Studebaker, not a Ford. Hell, Ford was still making Y blocks at this point in time. 289 cubic inch displacement, supercharged, that put out 275 horsepower. It was a smaller car of its day, so the power to weight ratio was excellent. Fastest 0 to 60 time acquired by the magazines back in the day was 7.8 seconds and a top speed of 125 miles per hour. It's honestly one of the most underrated cars of the 50s. Outside the whole muscle car thing, the Golden Hawk, she can walk a Thunderbird like she's standing still. That's a Beach Boys reference. Or a Corvette. The only cars that could really beat it in 57 was the Rambler that we just talked about and the Chrysler 300 series. But by 57, Chrysler was huge. Powerful, but huge. Okay, last car on our list today. 1962 Studebaker Avanti. This was, in my opinion, Studebaker's swan song. Studebaker ended up closing its doors in 1967. This and the Gran Turismo was probably one of the last two cars that they made that was absolutely great. This one was made of fiberglass. It was designed by Raymond Loewy. It was the fastest car in the world in 1962. Broke countless records, something to the tune of 29 records, had a top speed of 178 miles per hour. It was powered by a modified 289 out of a Hawk, not the Golden Hawk, just a regular Hawk. Power output was 240 horsepower. They did offer a supercharger as an extra option. I couldn't get a horsepower figure on that. It'd probably be in the neighborhood of the 275 horsepower figure from the Golden Hawk previous. So there you have it. Cars that could have been muscle cars. What do you think? Did I miss any? Open for discussion in the comment section below. I'll see you down there. Until next time, toodaloo!